The grand ballroom sparkled like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over women in designer gowns and men in expensive suits. Everyone seemed to belong there, moving through the crowd with the kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Everyone except Isabella. She stood near the kitchen entrance, tugging at the hem of her borrowed black dress. It was too tight around the shoulders and slightly too long, but it was the nicest thing she owned. Well, technically, she didn't own it. Her co-worker Maria had lent it to her for tonight's catering shift at this charity event in downtown Manhattan. Isabella had been working for Elite Events Catering for 6 months now, taking whatever shifts she could get. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than her morning job at the coffee shop, and the tips from wealthy clients sometimes made a real difference. Tonight's event was the biggest one she'd worked yet. Some kind of fundraiser for arts education, hosted at a private venue that probably cost more to rent than her family paid in rent for an entire year. "Isabella, we need more champagne glasses in the main hall," her supervisor called out. Snapping her back to reality, she nodded and grabbed a tray, carefully making her way through the crowd. As she walked, fragments of conversation drifted past her. Stock portfolios, vacation homes in the Hamptons, someone's daughter getting into Yale. It was like listening to people speak a different language. The event organizers had given the catering staff a 15-minute break, and Isabella found herself wandering away from the noise and chatter. Her feet were killing her in these borrowed heels, and she just needed a moment of quiet. She pushed through a side door and found herself in a smaller room, dimly lit and blissfully empty. Except it wasn't completely empty. In the center of the room sat the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was a grand piano, black and gleaming, its surface so perfectly polished she could see her reflection in it. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She glanced back at the door, making sure no one had followed her, then walked slowly toward the instrument. Growing up, Isabella's mother had somehow managed to get her an old keyboard from a yard sale. It was missing 3 keys and the speakers crackled, but her mother had been so proud. She'd saved for months to afford it, working double shifts at the hospital where she cleaned rooms. Isabella had taught herself to play on that broken keyboard, spending hours after school picking out melodies and learning from free YouTube tutorials. That was before her mother got sick, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart. Isabella hadn't touched a real piano in over 2 years, not since her music teacher at community college let her practice in the empty classroom after hours. She reached out and gently pressed one key. The note rang out, pure and clear, and something inside her chest ached with longing. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Isabella jumped, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her balance. A young man stood in the doorway watching her. He looked to be in his mid-20s, Asian, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead. He wore a simple black suit with no tie, and his hands were tucked casually in his pockets. "I'm so sorry," Isabella stammered, her face flushing hot. "I didn't mean to. I was just on my break and I saw the piano and I shouldn't have touched it. I'll go back to work right now." The young man held up a hand, a small smile playing at his lips. "It's okay, really, you're not in trouble." Isabella relaxed slightly, but she still felt embarrassed. He probably worked for the venue or something, and here she was, a catering worker wandering where she didn't belong. I used to play a little. I couldn't help myself." "Do you play well?" he asked, moving closer. His voice was soft, curious, rather than judgmental. Isabella shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Not really. I mean, I'm not trained or anything. I just taught myself on an old keyboard. Nothing like this." She gestured at the magnificent instrument behind her. "That's still impressive," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Teaching yourself takes real dedication." There was something kind in his eyes, something that made Isabella feel less like an intruder. She found herself smiling back at him. It was more like obsession, honestly. "My mom used to joke that I loved that broken keyboard more than anything else in the world." "Used to?" he asked gently. Isabella's smile faded. "She passed away 2 years ago, cancer." "I'm sorry," he said simply, and the way he said it made her believe he really was sorry, not just saying words out of politeness. An awkward silence stretched between them. Isabella shifted her weight, wondering if she should excuse herself and get back to work. But before she could speak, the young man did something unexpected. He walked over to the piano bench and sat down. "Would you like me to play something for you?" he asked, looking up at her with those kind eyes. Isabella blinked in surprise. "You play?" "A little," he said with a modest smile that somehow seemed a bit secretive. "I'd love that," Isabella said honestly. "I came over here hoping someone would play tonight. That's actually why I walked in. I heard they had this amazing piano for the event, and I thought maybe I'd get lucky and hear some music." He patted the space beside him on the bench. "Come sit," Isabella hesitated. She was definitely supposed to be back at work by now. But when would she ever get another chance like this? She sat down carefully, leaving proper space between them, very aware that her borrowed dress wasn't quite as elegant as what everyone else was wearing tonight. The young man positioned his hands over the keys, and Isabella noticed his fingers were long and graceful. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like someone remembering an old language, but then the melody grew stronger, more confident. It wasn't anything Isabella recognized, not classical or contemporary, but something unique and deeply moving. The music seemed to tell a story without words, filled with loneliness and longing, but also hope. Isabella felt tears prickling at her eyes. She didn't know why this particular melody affected her so deeply, but it touched something raw inside her. It reminded her of her mother, of sitting at that old broken keyboard, of all the dreams she'd had to put aside when reality crashed down. She became aware that the noise from the main ballroom had quieted. Looking toward the door, she saw that a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the music. People in their expensive clothes stood watching, but the young man beside her didn't seem to notice or care. He was lost in the music, his eyes closed, his whole body swaying slightly with the emotion of the piece. When the final note faded into silence, the crowd erupted in applause. That's when Isabella heard someone from the doorway say, "Absolutely brilliant, Mr. Chen. We had no idea you were going to perform tonight." "Mr. Chen?" The young man beside her opened his eyes and smiled at the crowd, acknowledging their applause with a modest nod. Someone else called out, "That was extraordinary, Daniel. Thank you so much for that generous donation earlier as well." Isabella's stomach dropped. Daniel Chen, she knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. He was the 23-year-old tech entrepreneur who'd sold his startup for hundreds of millions of dollars. He'd been featured in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, everywhere, and she'd just treated him like he was another staff member. Her face burned with embarrassment as she started to stand up, but Daniel reached out and gently caught her wrist. "Wait," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "Don't go yet." Isabella froze, her heart pounding. She looked down at where his hand rested on her wrist, then up at his face. He wasn't looking at the crowd or basking in their applause. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why did you want someone to play?" he asked softly. "Tonight, I mean. You said you came in here hoping to hear music." Isabella swallowed hard, aware that people were still watching them, probably wondering who this random catering worker was and why Daniel Chen was talking to her. But there was something in his eyes that made her answer honestly. "My mom used to say that music was the one luxury poor people could have for free, that no matter how hard life got, no one could take away the beauty of a song if you held it in your heart." Isabella's voice cracked slightly. "I guess I just wanted to feel close to her tonight. This room, this piano, it reminded me of what she always dreamed I could have." Daniel was quiet for a moment, still holding her wrist gently. Then he said something she'd never expected. "What if I told you I wanted to help make your mother's dream come true?" Isabella pulled her wrist away gently, shaking her head. "I don't understand what you mean." Daniel stood up from the piano bench, and suddenly Isabella was very aware of how many people were watching them. Women in diamond necklaces whispered to each other behind their hands. Men in tailored suits looked curious and slightly confused. Here was Daniel Chen, one of the youngest millionaires in New York, having an intimate conversation with a catering worker. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Daniel asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Isabella glanced at the door where her supervisor was probably looking for her. "I really should get back to work. My break ended 10 minutes ago." "Please," Daniel said. "Just 5 minutes." There was something in his expression, an earnestness that didn't match the image of a wealthy tech entrepreneur. Against her better judgment, Isabella nodded. Daniel led her through a side exit to a small balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her borrowed dress was. Without a word, Daniel shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. You don't have to do that, Isabella protested. I know, he said simply. But you're cold. Isabella pulled the jacket tighter around herself. It smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something clean and subtle. What did you mean in there? About my mother's dream? Daniel leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the glittering skyline. I heard you play that one note on the piano. I saw the way you looked at it, like it was something precious. And when you talked about your mother, he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I want to pay for you to go to music school. A real conservatory? The best one in the city. Isabella's mouth fell open. For a moment, she couldn't find words. When she finally did, they came out sharper than she intended. You don't even know me. I know you loved your mother. I know you taught yourself to play on a broken keyboard. I know that music means something to you, something real. Daniel turned to face her. Look, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Tonight's event? I donated $250,000 to arts education without even thinking about it. But that money will go into some general fund, get distributed through bureaucracy, and maybe help people eventually. This would be direct. I could see the difference it makes. So I'd be your charity project? Isabella felt heat rising in her cheeks, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was anger. You want to feel good about yourself by helping some poor girl? That's not what this is, Daniel said. But Isabella was already pulling off his jacket and shoving it back at him. You rich people are all the same. You think you can just throw money at things and fix them. You think that because you have wealth you understand what we need. Isabella's voice shook. I don't need your pity. I've been taking care of myself and my family just fine. Isabella, wait. How do you even know my name? She demanded. Daniel looked slightly sheepish. Your name tag. I saw it earlier. Isabella looked down and realized she was still wearing the small tag that said Isabella, Elite Events Catering. She felt suddenly foolish, standing there arguing with a millionaire on a balcony, wearing a borrowed dress that didn't fit right and shoes that were giving her blisters. I should go, she said quietly. Thank you for playing the piano. It was beautiful. But I can't accept your offer. She turned to leave, but Daniel's next words stopped her. My parents were never home when I was growing up. Isabella paused, her hand on the door handle. They were building their business empire, Daniel continued, his voice softer now. 16, 17-hour days. Sometimes they'd be gone for weeks on business trips. We had a nanny, obviously, and a cook and a driver. But the house was always so quiet and empty. When I was 8, my mom bought a piano because she thought it would make the house look more sophisticated. She never played it. Neither did my dad. Isabella turned around slowly. Daniel was still standing at the railing, but he wasn't looking at the skyline anymore. He was looking down at his hands. I taught myself to play on that piano. It was the only thing in that big empty house that felt like mine, you know? The only thing that kept me company. My parents didn't even notice I was playing until I was 13 and entered a competition at school. They showed up to watch me perform and my mom cried. She said she didn't realize I was so talented. Didn't know I'd been teaching myself all those years. He looked up at Isabella, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. That piece I played tonight? I wrote it when I was 17. I called it Alone in a Crowded House. It's about having everything money can buy but feeling completely invisible to the people who are supposed to love you. Isabella felt her anger melting away, replaced by something more complicated. She walked back to the railing and stood beside him, leaving a respectable distance between them. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That sounds really hard, Daniel shrugged. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I understand what it's like when music is the only thing that makes sense, when it's the only thing that feels real. And I'm not trying to make you a charity project. He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. I just thought maybe I could help someone who actually cares about music, someone who would appreciate the opportunity. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party drifting through the closed door behind them. I can't accept it, Isabella said finally. I appreciate what you're trying to do, I really do. But I can't take that kind of money from a stranger. What would you want in return? Nothing in life is free, especially not from rich people. I don't want anything in return, Daniel said, but Isabella shook her head. Everyone wants something. Maybe not right away, but eventually. And then I'd owe you this huge debt I could never repay. I'd rather stay poor and free than be owned by someone's generosity. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I offered you a job instead?" "A job? I need a personal assistant. Someone to help me manage my schedule, handle correspondence, coordinate meetings. The pay is good, way better than catering, and it's legitimate work, not charity. You'd be earning every penny." Isabella narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "You just happen to need a personal assistant? Right now? Tonight?" "I've been meaning to hire someone for months," Daniel said, and something in his tone made Isabella think he might actually be telling the truth. "My last assistant quit because I work too much and I'm apparently very disorganized. I need someone detail-oriented, someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm messing up. And you think I'd be good at that because 5 minutes ago you called me out for being a typical rich person who thinks money solves everything. You're honest. That's rare in my world." Isabella bit her lip, thinking she desperately needed money. Her younger brother needed new glasses that their insurance wouldn't cover. Her father's medication was getting more expensive every month, and she'd been trying to save enough to go back to community college, but at the rate she was going, it would take years. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. You work for me, I pay you a fair salary. If you're good at the job, you keep it. If you're not, I fire you. Simple as that. And the music school thing? Completely separate. If you want to apply to schools on your own time with your own money, that's your business. I won't bring it up again." Isabella studied his face, trying to figure out if he was being sincere or if this was some elaborate game rich people played. But Daniel's expression was open, hopeful even. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "That's fair. Here." Daniel pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. "My number's on there. Call me if you decide you're interested. The job pays $75,000 a year plus health insurance." Isabella nearly choked. $75,000? She made less than $30,000 working 2 jobs, and neither one offered health insurance. That's a lot of money," she managed to say. "It's the market rate for a good personal assistant in New York," Daniel said. "Maybe even on the low end, honestly. But you'd be working long hours. I'm not an easy boss." The door to the balcony opened and a woman in a glittering gold dress stepped out. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that made Isabella immediately self-conscious again. The woman's eyes swept over Isabella with barely concealed disdain before settling on Daniel. "There you are, darling," she said, her voice like honey with an edge underneath. "Everyone's been looking for you. Your mother wants you to meet the Harrington's daughter. You remember Christine, don't you?" "Not now, Vanessa," Daniel said, his tone suddenly cold. Vanessa's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Don't be rude, Daniel. These people donated a fortune tonight. The least you can do is socialize." Her gaze flicked to Isabella again. "I'm sure the help can wait until you're done with business." "Isabella isn't the help," Daniel said sharply. "She's a guest." Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Really?" "Because she's wearing a catering company name tag." Isabella felt her face burn. She'd forgotten about the stupid tag. Without a word, she ripped it off and crumpled it in her hand. "I was just leaving anyway." She pushed past Vanessa and headed for the door, but Daniel called after her. "Isabella, wait. Don't forget, I have your card," Isabella said without turning around. "I'll think about it." She walked back through the party with her head held high, even though inside she felt small and humiliated. She found her supervisor, apologized for being late, and finished her shift without saying another word to anyone. But that night, lying in bed in the tiny apartment she shared with her father and brother, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's offer. $75,000 a year, health insurance, a chance to save real money, maybe even enough to eventually pay for school herself. She pulled his business card out of her pocket and stared at it in the darkness. Daniel Chen, CEO, Chen Technologies. A phone number and email address printed in simple, elegant font. Maybe everyone did want something in return. Maybe there was no such thing as a free opportunity. But Isabella had been poor her entire life, and she'd learned that sometimes you had to take risks if you ever wanted things to change. She set the card on her nightstand and closed her eyes, already knowing what her decision would be. Isabella called the number 3 days later. She'd spent those 3 days arguing with herself, asking her father for advice and calculating exactly how much $75,000 could change their lives. Her father had told her to trust her instincts but be careful. Her 12-year-old brother Tommy had simply said, "Do it." We need the money. The truth was hard to ignore. They did need the money, Daniel answered on the second ring.
Hello?
It's Isabella. From the charity event. She paused. I'm calling about the job. There was a smile in his voice when he responded. I'm glad. Can you start Monday? That was 4 months ago. Now Isabella sat in Daniel's penthouse office reviewing his calendar for the upcoming week. The space was nothing like she'd expected. She'd imagined something cold and modern, all glass and steel. Instead, the office was warm and surprisingly cluttered. Books were stacked on every surface. Takeout containers from the past few days sat on a side table, and sticky notes covered one entire wall with reminders and ideas. You have a board meeting at 9 tomorrow, Isabella called out, not looking up from her tablet. Then lunch with investors at 12:30. And you promised your mother you'd come to dinner at 7. Don't even think about canceling on her again. Daniel emerged from his bedroom wearing sweatpants and an old Stanford t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. This was another thing Isabella had learned. Despite his wealth, Daniel lived like a regular 23-year-old guy when he wasn't putting on a suit for business meetings. Can I reschedule the investor lunch? He asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the mini fridge. No, you already rescheduled it twice. They're flying in from California specifically to meet with you. Daniel groaned and flopped onto the couch. You're mean. I'm efficient, Isabella corrected. There's a difference. And you pay me to keep you organized, so that's what I'm doing. Over the past 4 months, Isabella had discovered that working for Daniel was nothing like she'd expected. Yes, the hours were long. Yes, he was disorganized and often forgot to eat meals when he was focused on work. But he was also kind, funny, and treated her with genuine respect. He never made her feel like an employee, more like a partner. He also paid her exactly what he'd promised, with full health insurance that had already covered her father's medication and Tommy's new glasses. For the first time in years, Isabella wasn't constantly stressed about money. She'd even started saving. What are you working on? Daniel asked, watching her type notes into her tablet. I found a community college that offers night classes in music theory. I was just looking at the course schedule. Daniel sat up straighter. That's great. Are you going to enroll? Maybe. I need to see if I can afford it. Isabella did some quick math in her head. If I save for another 2 months, I should be able to cover tuition for one class. Isabella, don't, she said firmly, knowing what he was about to offer. We have an agreement. You pay me for my work. What I do with my money is my business. Daniel held up his hands in surrender. I was just going to say that if you need time off for classes, we can adjust your schedule. That's all. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. Oh, sorry, I'm just used to you trying to throw money at things. I've learned my lesson, Daniel said with a grin. You're way too stubborn to accept help even when you need it. I prefer the term independent. Isabella shot back, but she was smiling too. The office door buzzer rang, and Isabella checked the security screen. Her smile disappeared. It's Vanessa. Daniel's expression darkened. Tell her I'm not here. I'm not lying to your ex-girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend is a strong term. We went on like 3 dates that my mother arranged. The buzzer rang again, more insistently this time. Isabella sighed and pressed the intercom button. Yes? Let me up, sweetie. I need to talk to Daniel. Vanessa's voice dripped with fake sweetness. Isabella looked at Daniel, who shook his head firmly. But before she could respond, Vanessa added, I can see his car in the garage, so I know he's home. Don't make me call his mother. She's going to call my mother, Daniel muttered. Just let her up. Get it over with. Isabella buzzed her in reluctantly. 3 minutes later, Vanessa swept into the office wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly salary. Her eyes swept over Isabella with that same look of disdain from the charity event. Still playing secretary? Vanessa asked, her tone making it clear what she really thought of Isabella's job. Personal assistant? Isabella corrected coolly. And yes, still working. Some of us have to. Vanessa's smile was sharp. How quaint. Daniel, darling, we need to talk. Alone. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Isabella, Daniel said, not getting up from the couch. Vanessa's perfect composure cracked slightly. Fine. Your mother asked me to talk to you about the Spencer Foundation Gala next month. You need a date and she thinks we should go together. For appearances. I'm not interested in appearances, Daniel said flatly. Well, you should be. You're the face of a major company now. People talk, Daniel. And right now they're talking about how you've become a recluse who barely attends social events. Good. Maybe they'll leave me alone. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Then she turned to Isabella with a calculating look. Is this about her? Are you two? She waved her hand vaguely. That's none of your business, Daniel said, his voice hard. But Vanessa laughed, a cold sound that made Isabella's skin crawl. Oh, this is precious. Daniel Chen, tech genius and millionaire, falling for the help. Your mother is going to lose her mind. Get out, Daniel said, standing up now. I'm just being honest. You think this little romance is going to work? She's using you, Daniel. Can't you see that? She probably saw you at that charity event and saw dollar signs. Vanessa turned to Isabella. How much is he paying you? $75,000. That's nothing compared to what you could get if you played your cards right. Maybe get pregnant, secure that child support check. Isabella stood up slowly, her hands clenched into fists. She'd dealt with plenty of rude customers in her years of service work. But this was different. This felt personal and cruel in a way that made her blood boil. You need to leave, Isabella said, her voice steady despite her anger. Now. Excuse me? Vanessa looked genuinely shocked that Isabella had spoken to her that way. I said leave. You come in here, insult me, insult Daniel, and you have the nerve to act like you're doing him a favor? You don't care about him. You care about his money and his status. At least be honest about it. Vanessa's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Isabella said. You're someone who thinks wealth makes you better than other people. You think because you were born into money and I wasn't, that means you get to treat me like garbage. But the truth is, your money doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you a rich person who's cruel. Daniel, are you going to let her talk to me like this? Vanessa demanded. Daniel walked to the door and opened it. Isabella's right. You need to go, and don't come back. You're making a huge mistake, Vanessa hissed. Your mother isn't going to accept this. The board isn't going to accept this. You're throwing away everything for some girl who probably can't even spell portfolio. Out, Daniel said coldly. Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, but she paused next to Isabella and leaned in close. He'll get bored of you, she whispered. Rich men always do. And when he does, you'll be right back where you started, poor and forgotten. After Vanessa left, the office was silent. Isabella sat back down, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She couldn't believe she'd just said those things, couldn't believe she'd stood up to someone like Vanessa. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly. You shouldn't have had to deal with that. It's fine, Isabella said, though it wasn't really fine. Vanessa's words had hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. It's not fine. She had no right to say those things to you. Daniel sat down next to her, closer than he usually did. For what it's worth, nothing she said was true. Wasn't it, though? Isabella looked at him directly. I am just your employee. You do come from a completely different world than me. And people are probably talking about why you hired someone like me. Someone like you? You mean someone smart, hardworking, and honest? Yeah, I'm sure people are shocked I'd want those qualities in an assistant. Isabella wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Why did you really offer me this job, Daniel? And be honest this time. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. At first? Maybe it was partly because I wanted to help you. I won't lie about that. But after these past 4 months working with you every day, you're the best assistant I've ever had. You keep me organized, you call me out when I'm being stupid. You actually care about the work we're doing. Most people in my life just tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth. He paused, and Isabella noticed he was looking at her differently than he usually did. And yeah, Vanessa was partially right about one thing. I do have feelings for you, but not because you're some charity project or because I'm trying to play hero. I have feelings for you because you're brilliant and strong and you don't take crap from anyone, including me. Isabella's heart was pounding. Daniel, you don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know I'm your boss and that makes everything weird. I just wanted you to know that you're not just an employee to me. You're more than that. You've become important to me. Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her stomach dropped. It was a text from her father. Tommy's sick, high fever, at emergency room. Need you. She stood up immediately. I have to go. My brother's in the hospital. I'll drive you, Daniel said, already grabbing his keys. You don't have to. Isabella, please, let me help. And this time she did. The emergency room was crowded and loud, filled with the sounds of crying children and the antiseptic smell that all hospitals have. Isabella rushed through the automatic doors with Daniel close behind her. Her father stood near the registration desk, looking smaller and more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Papa," Isabella called out, and her father turned, relief flooding his face. "Mija, thank God. They just took Tommy back for tests. His fever spiked to 104. They think it might be pneumonia." Isabella felt her knees go weak. Pneumonia. That's what had started her mother's decline, what had weakened her immune system before the cancer took over. "Can I see him?" "Not yet. The doctors are with him now." Her father finally noticed Daniel standing behind Isabella. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's this?" "This is Daniel, my boss. He drove me here." Isabella felt awkward making introductions in an emergency room, but her father extended his hand anyway. "Roberto Martinez. Thank you for bringing my daughter." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "Of course, I'm sorry about your son. If there's anything I can do to help..." "We're fine," Roberto said, and Isabella recognized the pride in his voice, the same pride that ran through her own veins. "We have insurance now, thanks to Isabella's new job. We'll manage." They sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chairs to wait. Daniel stayed quiet, seeming to understand that his presence was already complicated enough without him trying to insert himself into their family crisis. Isabella appreciated that more than she could say. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Isabella's leg bounced nervously, and she kept checking her phone even though she knew the doctors would come out when they had news. Finally, a young doctor in scrubs emerged. "Family of Tommy Martinez." Isabella and her father jumped up. "That's us," Roberto said. "How is he?" "He has bacterial pneumonia, but we caught it early. We've started him on antibiotics and he's responding well. His fever is already coming down. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but he should be fine to go home tomorrow." Isabella felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Can we see him?" "Of course. Follow me." Tommy looked small in the hospital bed, an IV in his arm and oxygen tubes in his nose. But he was awake, and when he saw Isabella, he managed a weak smile. "Hey, sis, bet you thought you'd get rid of me that easy." Isabella laughed through her tears and kissed his forehead. "You're such a brat. You scared me half to death. The doctor said I'm going to be okay, but I have to stay here tonight." Tommy looked past her at Daniel, his eyes going wide. "Whoa, is that your boss? The millionaire guy?" "Tommy," Isabella said warningly, but Daniel stepped forward with a smile. "Guilty as charged. You must be Tommy. Isabella talks about you all the time." "Really? What does she say?" "That you're brilliant at math and that you want to be an engineer someday." Tommy's face lit up despite his illness. "Yeah, I want to design bridges. The big ones like the Golden Gate. That's ambitious." "I like it." Daniel pulled out his phone. "You know what? When you're feeling better, you should come visit my office. I have some engineering software you might find interesting." "Seriously?" Tommy looked at Isabella for confirmation, and she nodded, smiling despite herself. "Okay, enough excitement," Roberto said gently. "You need to rest, mijo." A nurse came in to check Tommy's vitals, and Isabella and her father stepped into the hallway. Daniel had already moved back to the waiting area, giving them privacy. "He seems like a good man," Roberto said carefully. "Your boss?" "He is," Isabella admitted, but..." her father prompted, reading her expression. Isabella sighed. "But his ex-girlfriend came by the office today. She said some things that got me thinking. She said Daniel would get bored of me eventually. That I don't belong in his world." "And do you have feelings for him? Beyond just being his employee?" Isabella hadn't said it out loud yet, not even to herself. But standing in this hospital hallway, exhausted and emotionally raw, the truth came tumbling out. "Yes, I think I do. And that scares me, Papa. What if she's right? What if I'm just setting myself up to get hurt?" Roberto put his hands on her shoulders, looking at her with those warm brown eyes that had guided her through every difficult decision in her life. "Mija, I've watched you survive things that would have broken other people. You lost your mother. You dropped out of school to help support this family. You've worked 2 jobs and never complained. You are strong enough to handle anything, including heartbreak if it comes to that. But what if I'm making a mistake? Then you'll learn from it and move on. But Isabella, you can't let fear stop you from living. Your mother wouldn't have wanted that." He squeezed her shoulders gently. "That young man drove you to the hospital without hesitation. He's sitting in an uncomfortable chair in a crowded emergency room when he could be anywhere else. That tells me something about his character." Isabella hugged her father tightly. "I don't know what to do. Talk to him, be honest. That's all you can do." When they returned to the waiting area, Daniel was on his phone, but he put it away immediately when he saw them. "How's Tommy?" "Sleeping," Isabella said. "Papa's going to stay with him tonight. I should probably head home. I'll take you," Daniel offered. On the drive back to Isabella's apartment, they were both quiet. The city lights blurred past the window as Daniel navigated the late-night traffic. Finally, he broke the silence. "I meant what I said earlier. About having feelings for you." Isabella's stomach flipped. "I know, but I also know I put you in an impossible position. You work for me. You depend on that income for your family. If you don't feel the same way, nothing has to change. I promise." Isabella stared at her hands. "What if I do feel the same way? What then? Your mother already hates me. Vanessa made it clear that your whole world thinks I'm not good enough for you. And she's probably right. I can't even afford to take you to a nice restaurant on a date. I don't know how to act at fancy parties. I don't understand half the things your friends talk about." Daniel pulled over to the side of the road and put the car in park. He turned to face her fully. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" Isabella felt tears threatening again. "Daniel, I see someone who taught herself to play piano on a broken keyboard because music mattered more than having perfect equipment. I see someone who calls me out when I'm being an idiot, even though I'm her boss. I see someone who dropped everything to rush to the hospital for her little brother. I see someone who fights for every single thing she has and never gives up." He reached over and gently took her hand. "You think you're not good enough for my world?" "Isabella, my world is full of people who've never had to fight for anything. They're boring and predictable and they only care about money and status. You're real. You make me want to be real too." A tear rolled down Isabella's cheek. "I'm scared. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose what we have now." "You won't lose your job. I promise you that. If you want to keep things professional, we keep things professional. If you want to see where this goes, we figure it out together. But the choice is yours, Isabella. I'm not going to pressure you." Isabella looked at their joined hands. His hand was soft, probably had never done a day of hard labor. Hers was rougher, marked by years of work. But somehow they fit together. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about all of this. It's been a really long day and my head is spinning." "Take all the time you need," Daniel said softly. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made her heart ache. He drove her home and walked her to the door of her apartment building. "Text me when you get upstairs safely." Isabella nodded. "Thank you for everything tonight." "Any time," he said, and she knew he meant it. Upstairs in her tiny apartment, Isabella lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Tommy's fever is down. Sleeping peacefully. Don't worry about us. Think about yourself for once." Another text came through, this time from Daniel. "Made it home. I know you need time, but I just want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm grateful to have you in my life. Sleep well, Isabella." Isabella hugged her phone to her chest and closed her eyes. She thought about the look on Daniel's face when he'd confessed his feelings. She thought about how he'd stayed at the hospital without being asked. She thought about Vanessa's cruel words and the reality of the different worlds they came from. But most of all, she thought about what her mother used to say. "The only thing worse than being poor is being poor and afraid to dream." Isabella had been afraid for so long. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of being used, afraid of wanting things she couldn't have. But maybe her father was right. Maybe she was strong enough to take this risk. She picked up her phone and typed out a message to Daniel. "I've been thinking. Would you want to have dinner with me tomorrow? Nothing fancy. Just a regular date." "I treat." His response came back almost immediately. "I would love that. But can we split the check? I know how you feel about people trying to pay for things." Isabella smiled in the darkness. "Deal. It's a date then. Good night, Isabella." "Good night, Daniel." She set her phone down and finally felt herself relax. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this relationship would work or if all her fears would come true. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. Tomorrow, she'd face whatever consequences came from dating her boss. Tomorrow, she'd worry about Daniel's family and social circle and all the obstacles in their way. But tonight, she let herself feel happy. She let herself hope, and that was enough. 3 weeks after their first date, Isabella's world came crashing down. She'd just finished a meeting with Daniel's legal team when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told her to answer it. "Is this Isabella Martinez?" A woman's voice, smooth and polished. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Catherine Chen. I'm Daniel's mother." "I think it's time we had a conversation." Isabella's stomach dropped. She glanced through the glass wall of the conference room where Daniel was still talking with his lawyers. "What about?" "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. There's a cafe on Madison Avenue, Bella Luna. Can you meet me there in an hour?" Every instinct told Isabella this was a bad idea, but she also knew this conversation was inevitable. "I'll be there." The cafe was exactly the kind of place Isabella expected. Elegant, expensive, with tiny portions and waiters in bow ties. Catherine Chen sat at a corner table wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly rent. She was beautiful in a cold, perfect way with silver streaking through her dark hair. "Isabella, thank you for coming." Catherine gestured to the seat across from her. "Please sit." Isabella sat, keeping her purse on her lap like a shield. "What did you want to talk about?" Catherine didn't waste time with small talk. "My son has become quite attached to you. I'm sure you're aware of that. Daniel and I care about each other, yes." "Care." Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's a nice word. Tell me, Isabella, what do you really want from my son?" "I want him to be happy." "How noble." "And his money has nothing to do with it?" Isabella felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I was doing fine before I met Daniel. I had 2 jobs. I was supporting my family. I didn't need him. But you took his job offer quickly enough. $75,000 a year. That's quite an improvement over catering wages, isn't it? I earned that job. I work hard every single day." Catherine leaned back in her chair, studying Isabella like she was a puzzle to be solved. "I'm sure you do, but let's be realistic. You come from a completely different world than Daniel. You didn't go to the right schools. You don't have the right connections. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family like ours." "You're right," Isabella said, surprising Catherine. "I don't come from money. I went to public school. My mom was a hospital cleaner and my dad works in construction. But that doesn't make me a bad person. And it doesn't mean I'm using your son. Perhaps not intentionally. But Isabella, do you really think this relationship can work? Daniel has responsibilities. He's the face of a major company. He needs someone who can stand beside him at galas, who knows how to navigate our social circles, who can help him build the life he's meant to have." Catherine pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is a check for $200,000. More than enough to finish your education, help your family, start fresh somewhere new." Isabella stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "You're trying to pay me to leave him. I'm trying to make this easier for everyone. You get the financial security you need. Daniel moves on before this gets more complicated. Everyone wins. Except that I love him." The words came out before Isabella could stop them, and she realized with a jolt that they were true. She loved Daniel. Despite all her fears and doubts, despite knowing how complicated it was, she loved him. Catherine's expression hardened. "Love isn't enough. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. My husband and I built an empire together. But do you know what kept us together? Shared goals, shared understanding, compatibility in the ways that matter for business and family." She pushed the envelope closer. "Take the money, Isabella. Walk away with your dignity intact. Because if you force me to, I can make your life very difficult. I can have you fired. I can make sure no one in this city will hire you. I can destroy your father's career with a few phone calls." Isabella felt like she couldn't breathe. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. This was why she'd tried to keep her distance from Daniel in the first place. But hearing these threats out loud, seeing the cold calculation in Catherine's eyes, something inside Isabella snapped. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several other diners turned to look. "You can threaten me all you want. You can try to destroy my life. But I'm not taking your money and I'm not leaving Daniel. You know why? Because unlike you, I actually care about him as a person, not as a business asset or a status symbol." Isabella's voice shook, but she kept going. "You talk about love not being enough? At least I know what love is. All you know is control and manipulation." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Catherine hissed. "No, how dare you? How dare you try to buy off anyone who might actually make your son happy? How dare you treat him like he's some kind of puppet who can't make his own decisions? He's 23 years old, and from what he's told me, you've been controlling every aspect of his life since he was a child. Well, guess what? He's an adult now, and whether you like it or not, he gets to choose who he loves. Isabella turned to leave, but Catherine's voice stopped her. He'll choose me. In the end, they always do. Family and money always win. Then I feel sorry for you, Isabella said quietly, because you're going to lose your son over this. Maybe not today, but eventually. And when you're old and alone in your mansion, you'll realize that all the money in the world couldn't buy you the one thing that actually matters. Isabella walked out of the cafe with her head held high, even though inside she was shaking. She made it half a block before she had to stop and lean against a building, trying to catch her breath. What had she just done? She'd essentially declared war on one of the most powerful women in New York. Her phone rang. It was Daniel. Hey, where are you? I thought we were going over the quarterly reports. Isabella closed her eyes. She couldn't tell him about this meeting, not yet. It would force him to choose between her and his mother, and she couldn't do that to him. I'm sorry, something came up with my dad. Can we reschedule? Of course. Is everything okay? Yeah, it's fine. I just need to handle some family stuff. Okay, let me know if you need anything. After she hung up, Isabella realized she was crying. She walked aimlessly for an hour, trying to figure out what to do. Catherine's words echoed in her head. Family and money always win. Maybe she was right. Maybe Isabella was being foolish to think this could work. She and Daniel had been dating for 3 weeks. In the grand scheme of things, that was nothing. Was it really worth risking everything her family had? By the time Isabella made it home, she'd made a decision. She sat at her tiny kitchen table and wrote a letter to Daniel. She told him about the meeting with his mother. She told him that she loved him, but that she couldn't come between him and his family. She told him that she was resigning as his assistant, effective immediately. It was the hardest thing she'd ever written. She sealed the letter in an envelope and set it on the table. Tomorrow she would deliver it to his office. Tomorrow she would walk away from the best thing that had ever happened to her, because sometimes love meant letting go. But that night, she let herself cry. She cried for what could have been. She cried for the dreams she'd allowed herself to have. And she cried because somewhere along the way she'd broken her own rule. She'd let herself hope. The next morning, Isabella woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications. Dozens of them. Confused and groggy, she unlocked her screen and saw that Daniel had posted something on social media. Her heart stopped when she read it. I've spent my whole life letting other people make decisions for me. Where to go to school, what company to build, who to date. Today I'm making my own choice. I'm stepping down as CEO of Chen Technologies to focus on what actually matters to me. I'm starting a foundation to provide music education to kids who can't afford it. And I'm choosing to be with someone who sees me as a person, not a bank account. Isabella Martinez, if you're reading this, I love you. And I don't care what anyone else thinks about it. Below the text was a photo. It was from the night at the charity gala, a candid shot someone must have taken. Daniel was sitting at the piano and Isabella was standing beside him, tears on her cheeks, completely lost in the music. It was the moment everything had started.